What's up, YouTube? I'm out here today with my X-Pro Templar X 250. I'm making a video on how to set up your front end of your chassis of your motorcycle. These principles will apply to pretty much any off-road motorcycle. I felt it was important to do a video like this because the owner's manual for this motorcycle doesn't really have many specifications or details on the fine-tuning of and the quality control things that we normally do to set up a motorcycle for optimal safety, reliability, and performance. So we're going to start with going over some of the chemicals we're going to use. So what I have here is two different types of thread locker and some white lithium grease. Now I'm using the white lithium grease because that's what comes on this motorcycle from the factory for the axles and the bearings. So we're just going to go with that for this bike. Other motorcycles I've used Bel-Ray waterproof grease. So whatever you have, if you want to remove the existing white lithium grease from the wheels and put your own favorite grease in there, go ahead. So the thread lockers I'm using today is Loctite 243, and I'm using Vibratite 121. So these are both considered blue thread lockers, meaning that they're not permanent and they're medium strength. The Loctite 243 is a much higher strength than your average quote-unquote blue thread locker. Requires more heat to remove it and or more breakaway torque value, whereas the Vibratite is a much lower strength blue thread locker. Probably would require about half of as much force to remove. So the 243 is commonly used for other name brand motorcycles. I'm just going to say a KTM because I've owned a lot of KTMs and Husqvarnas, and they do specify using Loctite 243 on many parts of their motorcycles. So we're going to start with the handlebars of this motorcycle, just because when you receive your motorcycle from the crate, it's one of the first things you're going to need to install. So there's two parts for the handlebars. There's the handlebar mounts that actually attach through the top triple tree, and then we have the handlebar, we're going to call these clamps up here, where we see these 4 bolts. So for the handlebar mounts, where the bolt comes up through the bottom of the top triple clamp, I like to use the Loctite 243 on those bolts, and I like to torque those to approximately 30 foot-pounds of torque. That's what KTM specifies for their motorcycles. For the upper clamps, I'm going to use the lighter thread locker, in my case the Vibratite, and we're going to torque those to between 15 to 20 foot-pounds of torque. Now when I received this motorcycle from the crate, the handlebar mounts were already attached to the top triple tree. There does appear to be some type of thread locker on those bolts from the factory. I did not know that before they took the bolts out. So you're probably okay to not have to apply thread locker to those, but in my case I went ahead and did that anyway since I had the bolts out. And either way, you probably want to torque them down to specification, again about 30 foot-pounds of torque. If you want to remove those bolts from the mounts, you're going to have to stabilize the mounts by temporarily attaching the handlebars to the clamps so that the mounts won't rotate as you try to undo the bolt from them. So just a little tip there if you want to remove those bolts from the mount. Now the next thing that we want to do is to align the height of the fork tubes in the triple clamps. So how we know if the forks are level is we're going to stick our axle through the axle lugs of the forks, and If they're properly aligned in vertical height, the axle should slide in smoothly. You should be able to rotate that with your fingers without much effort, and that is with the of course pinch bolts on the axle lugs backed off. So in this case we're pretty good. If it is not going through easily and not rotating easily, you'll need to adjust the height of the fork. It's going to be easier to do on the right hand side fork. You're going to have to loosen the 2 bolts on the bottom triple, loosen the 2 bolts on the top triple clamp, and move that fork tube up or down to the proper height until that axle slides smoothly. Once you have that axle height established where it needs to be, you want to properly torque these triple clamps. This is a very important step that often gets neglected. The reason this is important is because too much force can squeeze on these outer tubes, cause damage to the outer tubes potentially, and also cause binding of the inner fork tube as it slides up and down through the outer fork tube. So there are no torque specifications given by X-Pro for this motorcycle for the triple clamps. What I will say is that in many service manuals for other motorcycles, such as the KTM, they're going to specify approximately 14 to 15 foot-pounds of torque for the lower triple clamps. And for the upper triple clamps, they're going to specify around 15 to 17 foot-pounds of torque. I probably would not recommend any more than at most 17 foot-pounds of torque for the top and at most 15 foot-pounds of torque for the bottom triple clamps. Next, I want to briefly turn my attention to the front wheel. We have the wheel spacers that become inserted into the hub through the seal of the hub, the wheel seal. Behind that seal is the bearing. Just an FYI, if you want to check your bearings, you can place your finger inside, and that bearing should be able to move around, rotate rather easily with a little bit of drag, but no notchiness or grittiness like you'll find when the bearings start to go bad. You also want to make sure on these motorcycles that the seal here is flush with the outer surface of the hub. When I received this motorcycle, this seal was not quite flush. It was in more on the one side and out more on the other, so you can just push that seal in with your finger or use a hammer and lightly tap around the perimeter to seat that better. I also suggest and recommend that you apply some grease to the inner part of the seal where the spacer slides into, and that will help to keep moisture out of that wheel bearing assembly. Next thing we're going to do is install the front wheel into the motorcycle. After we get the rotor into the center of the brake pads, we're going to insert the front axle. We're going to put a light coating of that grease on the tire axle just so it slides in and out smoothly and will not become stuck. Okay, once that axle is through the wheel, we're going to tighten up this axle nut using our 21 millimeter socket, and it's going to get to the point where you can't tighten it anymore without the side of the axle rotating, as you can see here. So next step we need to do is to tighten one of these pinch bolts so that the axle will not move as we continue to tighten down the nut. Now, with that pinch bolt tightened, we can proceed to apply the proper amount of finishing torque on the front axle nut. Now, the torque specification for the front axle is not given for this motorcycle. If you look in KTM manuals for their bikes, They're usually requiring about 36 to 40 foot-pounds of torque. Other motorcycles will use up to 60 foot-pounds of torque. So somewhere in that range of 40 to 60 foot-pounds of torque will be appropriate. And I choose to use about 45 to 50, so that if I ever have to do a trail side repair, then I'm able to get these off, get this nut off without requiring too much force. So now we're going to go back and make sure that the front axle is aligned with the lug of the fork on this side. So we're going to back off on that pinch bolt that we tightened earlier. Make sure that both pinch bolts are loose. And with their finger and thumb, we're going to push on that axle lug. You can see that little bit of movement, and that will center at its natural resting point so that there isn't any excessive force trying to pull this fork inward toward the hub more than it needs to be. After we do that, we're just going to go back and tighten both of these pinch bolts. And again, there's no torque specification given for this particular motorcycle. Other motorcycles will recommend the range of approximately 11 to 15 foot-pounds of torque. So not a whole lot of torque is required for these pinch bolts, which are 12 millimeter nuts or bolts in this case. And the final step is just going to be to tighten the pinch bolts on the right side, or sorry, the left side, the brake side of the motorcycle to specification. And that is it. That is how you align your forks and the front axle, front wheel of your motorcycle. I hope this video was helpful to somebody. If you liked the video and you would like to see more, then please like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you. Have a